Oh my God!
What?
I just realized it hit me. Tom Brady is just like another famous not-so-nice guy.
Wait, you mean that notorious team leader who was told he wasn't any good, but he still pushed through and made sure everyone knew his name?
You got it. Hitler!
Yeah!
They're so alike. The only difference between Tom Brady and Hitler is that Hitler stuck with his wife until the end.
How about another joke, Murray?
No, I think we've had enough of your jokes.
What do you get
I don't think so.
when you cross
I think
a
we're
mentally
done
ill
with your
loner
jokes.
with
That's
a
it.
society that abandons him and treats him like trash?
Call the police,
I'll
Gene.
tell you what you get.
Call the police.
You get what you fucking deserve.
Certified lover boy, certified pedophiles. Wop, 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 wop. That fuck 'em up. Wop, 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 wop. I'ma do my stuff. Why you trolling like a bitch? Ain't you tired? Tryna strike a chord, and it's probably A minor. They not like us. 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 They not like us.
Let's fucking go, dude. What a time to be alive. And what a time to be on Twitter, too. Oh my god, dude. Twitter hasn't been like this since fucking Trump got COVID. My god, it's such a beautiful thing to see. You love to see it. My boy Drizzy just getting his shit absolutely raked across the coals in front of everyone. It's been a long time coming, man. Just let it wash over you. Let it soak in. Oh, and also in the news this week, the genocide in Gaza is still going very strong, as almost every Gazan university is now completely destroyed. And at the same time, in the heart of the empire at American universities, the protesters and their acts of domestic terrorism are successfully being brutalized and squashed by the Omni Consumer Products Police Force. And so whether you're having a good, wholesome laugh at everyone dogpiling on Drake for being a pedophile, or if you're having more of a delirious laugh about how bleak everything kind of is in the world, or potentially in your own personal life, I think there is no better movie for us to turn to now than Martin Scorsese's The King of Comedy. But before I get carried away talking about other shit, I have some questions for you, dear listener. Does the end of history get you down? Do you ever feel like maybe life is a big joke? Are you struggling to pay your bills and you think that it's kind of funny? Do you really need to go to therapy, but you can't because that shit's too fucking expensive? Well, I have some good therapy for you. That's right, today we're sitting down and we're talking about 2019's The Joker, starring, of course, my boy Joaquin Phoenix from Beau is Afraid. Yep, you know him, you love him. And directed by Todd Phillips, who made silly little movies like the Hangover movies and Project X. You know those. We all love those. No, I'm just playing. We're talking about The King of Comedy, which is a classic Martin Scorsese movie from the 80s. It's something that the first Joker movie was like clearly deeply inspired by. And I think it's the perfect movie to talk about today. For one, in light of the new Joker movie coming out pretty soon. For two, because it's, you know, the first fucking Marty movie. We had to talk about a Marty movie. For three, because it's the second in what I've now decided is my Scaring the Hose series. As this movie, I guess Beau is Afraid the movie scares the hose, but the hose actually love Beau. Whereas in this movie, our main character, Rupert Pupkin, does in fact scare several hoes. And so I think it fits here. And for four, much like the Joker, The King of Comedy definitely captures this like delirious part of neoliberalism, which was still in its infancy at the time this movie was released, but has since then only become more intense and more institutionalized as our main character, Rupert Pupkin, is this kind of like impoverished loser, but because of the superstructure under which he lives, he can't even connect with the other losers around him. And so he spends all of his time feeling alienated and just watching these fucking vampires on TV and pretending to be like them. Or not even like them, but like the celebrity product that they're selling him, to the point that it drives him completely insane. And the plot basically revolves around Pupkin's worship of and attempt to emulate his favorite late-night stand-up comedian, Jerry Langford, who is played by Jerry Lewis, a great stand-up comedian from the time, who basically just plays a combination of himself and like a Johnny Carson, not to be confused with Avery's favorite politician, Ben Carson. And much like Arthur Fleck in The Joker, Rupert Pupkin in The King of Comedy doesn't have much else in his life aside from this like dream of essentially becoming his favorite celebrity. But a crucial difference in the two films is that we watch Arthur Fleck go from this like poor guy who's kind of down on his luck, but mostly normal. And then he turns into a killer and ultimately the Joker throughout the course of the movie. And it happens gradually, right? Like we see his shitty working conditions, his interactions with his therapist, him getting beaten on the subway. But here in The King of Comedy, Rupert Pupkin is completely insane, like from the moment we meet him. And actually the first thing we see him do is the first scene in the movie, he opportunistically helps Jerry get away from like this mob of people and into his car, but only to also follow him into his car and then try and pitch his stand-up routine to him. And Jerry's actually pretty nice about it. And he tells Rupert to call his office and send him a tape. And this is what Robert De Niro really captures so well with Rupert, is that he clearly can only possibly hear from Jerry, oh yes, Rupert, you can do what you're trying to do, or yeah, we're best friends now, you're definitely on the show. And then from then on, he just refuses to leave Jerry alone. He tries to take him out for dinner. And there's this great scene where Jerry has to tell him like 10 times to leave him alone. And he just keeps being like, oh, one more thing, Jerry. And he'll like tell him like a shitty joke or how much he loves him or whatever. And again, De Niro captures this so well because in almost every interaction that he has with another character, someone is like clearly telling him something like, hey, don't do that, or please leave me alone, or I'm not comfortable with this. And Rupert just repeatedly and infuriatingly is like, no, it's fine, or like, yeah, but I really just want to do this. He really is like an I think you should leave character, which now that I say that, I feel like that Tim Robinson character is definitely based probably partly on Rupert Pupkin from this movie. And beyond not being able to take a hint or understand social cues, Rupert has this like deep cynicism and completely unearned confidence. He actually goes out to dinner with one of the other main characters, Rita, who is sort of like a love interest, but ultimately, like everyone else in this movie, she just gets used by Rupert as a way of fulfilling his own dream. And they actually go out to dinner in one scene, and Rupert is just telling her all about how rich and famous he's going to be, and he offers to let Rita be his wife and the queen of comedy. And she's kind of like, oh, I don't know. And that pisses him off because he's like, well, look, I just offered you a golden ticket on the train before it leaves the station, and I've gotten too rich for you. And he keeps saying weird shit the whole time. Like he goes, most beautiful girls die alone, and I don't want you to die alone. And so through the whole dinner, like just kind of like talking about himself, talking about these like delusions that he has. And we, the audience, never learn anything about Rita, despite her being in quite a bit of this movie. All we know is that she works at a bar and that she knows Rupert. But ultimately, he's not interested in her outside of her ability to play like this character in this alternate universe that he's creating for himself. And there's actually a scene where they show up at Jerry's house together because he's somehow convinced Rita that Jerry's invited them over for the weekend. And as soon as Jerry finds out, of course he goes back home and he's like, you guys need to get the fuck out of my house. And he keeps like using Rita, and he keeps being like, oh no, Rita's having a great time. She doesn't want to leave. Don't make her leave. And she's like, no, Rupert, like I want to go. He's telling us to go. And he, of course, is like, no, that's not what he's saying. He wants us to stay here. And that's just how he fucking talks through the entire movie. And it's so fucking infuriating to watch. Oh, my God. And then the other big character here is Rupert's friend Masha. And she has a similar obsession with Jerry as Rupert does. Like one of the first things we do is we watch her stalk Jerry just on the streets of New York as he actually runs away from her, and she chases him into his office. And really, she is one of the most tragic parts. There are a lot of tragic things going on for Rupert in this movie, but this is one of the more devastating ones because he spends all of this time like trying to impress Rita and just fantasizing about her as like this queen in like this dream world that he's making. But him and Masha are at least drawn together by the fact that they have like a shared obsession with Jerry. And she just inexplicably hangs out with him all the time. So, I mean, they're both insane, so maybe this isn't a good idea. But like if he wanted a girlfriend so bad, or even if they could just be friends, it may, make Rupert like a little bit less crazy. But the point here is that, of course, they can't be friends because they're both competing with each other for the affection of a man who wants absolutely nothing to do with them. And they're both like much more interested in creating these alternate realities for themselves as opposed to just living in the real world and like actually interacting with each other.
Just do this for me, Rupert. What about the time I've done things for you?
What have you done for me? You haven't done anything for me. What are you talking about?
How about Howard Johnson's? I brought you food, I brought you coffee night after night. How about that, huh?
I think you got your mind screwed up because you didn't get me anything. I bought my
You
own
never
coffee.
bought anything.
I bought my own
You
coffee.
never bought anything.
But what about things that I did for you that no money can buy? No money can buy. What about the time I gave you my spot? You came over there, I gave you my spot. You stood there and I let you get right next to Jerry. I waited for 8 hours for him and you went right next to him. You were crying to me because you wanted to get next to Jerry and you got next to him. And what about the time I gave you my last album of the best of Jerry? What about that? It wasn't anybody else, it was me, and I didn't even ask you for money and I can't even pay my rent. I can't believe this girl.
Okay, Rupert, you want to do that? Here, I got money for you. I got plenty of money because I can't believe how long I've hung out with you and been your friend and listened to your tired, stale, boring jokes. Come on, here's $900.
You be quiet, you're yelling in the street.
No,
Like...
so take this and give it to Jerry, all right?
So for a quick plot summary of The King of Comedy, Rupert meets Jerry in the car at the beginning of the movie, at which point he's instructed to call Jerry's office because he's been harassing him and trying to get on the show, and Jerry's kind of like, all right, whatever, dude, just give me a call and we'll see. But then instead of doing that, actually he calls his office from a payphone and tells him like, hey, I'm here to talk to Jerry. And then they're like, oh, Jerry's in a meeting. And he does, a classic Rupert thing. And he's like, oh, actually, I'm also in a meeting. He's literally calling him from a payphone just in the middle of New York, which actually, apparently, it's the same payphone that Martin Scorsese and Robert De Niro used to use when they were calling producers at the beginning of their careers. So that's why they put that in this movie. But then, of course, after doing that, he just shows up at Jerry's office and tells the secretary that he has an appointment with Jerry, which, of course, the secretary instantly finds out isn't true. And then he basically tries as hard as he can to meet with him, again, calling him repeatedly, attempting to wait at the office over the weekend after he's told to come back the next week, giving him a tape and like insisting that Jerry listens to it. And then eventually just straight up walking into the building and trying to march his way up to Jerry's office before he's thrown out by security. And then, of course, he just straight up shows up at Jerry's house one time uninvited, again with Rita as a way of like trying to use her basically to get to Jerry. At this point, after all of these failed attempts, all of his failed attempts to win over Rita and to impress Jerry, he just decides to team up with Masha and go ahead and kidnap Jerry so they can both live out their various fantasies. And the scene where they kidnap him is hilarious because they're just so uncoordinated and so goofy. And Rupert's wearing like a really silly disguise, like with a mustache and glasses. And he holds a gun up to Jerry to get him into the car, but like as he's walking up to him, he drops the gun and like fumbles it around and then has to pick it back up. And then he's like, get in the fucking car, Jerry. And Jerry just, of course, like instantly recognizes him and he's like, oh my God, okay, fine, I'll get in the car. And so they get him in there and they bring him back to Masha's house, at which point Rupert calls the studio and has Jerry tell them that he is tied up and he has a gun pointed to him and they need to give Rupert his spot on the show tonight or else he's going to die. Which that scene is hilarious too, because instead of just like writing down a script for Jerry to read, he writes it on like 12 little cue cards. And some of them are like turned upside down or turned backwards or out of order, which I have to believe Rupert's kind of doing on purpose, because he definitely has that side to him where he's just constantly telling jokes and just doing his like shitty stand-up bit just in his normal speech. Almost similar to the way that Arthur Fleck compulsively laughs and has that affliction where he wants to take things seriously but physically can't. Whereas in this movie, Rupert just isn't interested in taking things seriously because he's just too hilarious. But then so Rupert gets the spot on the show that he wanted, and so he goes to do that. And meanwhile, Masha is left with Jerry at her house, and there's this great scene where she has him tied up with a fuck ton of tape, and she has his mouth taped over, and he's just tied to a chair, and she's all dressed up, and they're having like this candlelit dinner, and she's telling Jerry how she feels and like trying to have sex with him while he's just tied up and he can't fucking do anything. But then he eventually convinces her to undo the tape and let him go, like promising to stay there with him. But then, of course, he escapes. But by the time he does that, Rupert has already gotten to the studio, been confronted by the FBI and the police about kidnapping Jerry. But then they ultimately let him do his stand-up bit because he has Jerry hostage. And he's already finished it by the time Jerry leaves the apartment. And so what Rupert does is he has the cops take him to the bar where Rita works just in time for the stand-up to air. And they all watch it together. And he just gives one monologue, which is honestly incredible. For one, it's really funny. For two, it's depressing. All of the bits are about like his parents being alcoholics, his mom being dead, and just like how shitty his life is. But it is genuinely hilarious, which I thought was one of the more interesting choices in the movie that Marty made, because he could have just made him bomb and just be kind of this total disaster. But like, for as much as Rupert is a bad person in this movie, and you're not really asked to sympathize with him that much, there is just the smallest little bit in him. Like, he's not quite the bad guy. Like, he just has a little bit of, there's just a tiny little bit of Rupert in everyone that watches this movie, I think. Like, there was a little part of me that was honestly rooting for Rupert. For one, because his life is just so bad. But for two, because I do kind of get the desire to be, like, famous, or I guess today just being some sort of content creator, both as a way of avoiding the inevitable death cult of professional work, but also when people expect this kind of career to fill, like, a hole in their heart or in their soul. I mean, I don't think that's, like, a healthy way of thinking about it, but I do get it. Like, for example, there is kind of a similarity between Rupert incessantly bothering Jerry and, like, me forcing my friends to listen to this podcast, for example.
Till the tears would stroll down her face and she would throw up! Yeah, and who would clean it up? Not Dad. He was too busy down at O'Grady's throwing up on his own. Yeah. In fact, until I was 16, I thought throwing up was a sign of maturity. You know, while the other kids were off in the woods sneaking cigarettes, I was hiding behind the house with my fingers down my throat. Until one day, my father caught me. And, you know, just as he was giving me a final kick in the stomach for luck, I managed to heave all over his new shoes. That's it, I thought. I've made it. I'm finally a man.
And so he's telling all these jokes about his life and his family. And he's absolutely crushing. The studio audience loves him. But then at the end of the monologue, he decides to go ahead and tell them what he's done. And he just straight up says, yeah, Jerry's not here because I kidnapped him. I'm holding him hostage, and I'm probably going to go to jail after this. And the studio audience laughs at him, and he says, well, you can laugh at me, but tomorrow when I'm in jail, you'll realize I'm not kidding. But I did this because I decided it's better to be king for a night than schmuck for a lifetime. And that really is the line of this movie. Again, like completing his character and making him two-dimensional, because he's not really wrong. Like, I don't think... I'm not really planning to do anything like this soon. Maybe I'm obligated to say you shouldn't do anything like this either, dear listener. But just that line there, better to be king for a night than schmuck for a lifetime. I think I think that's something I can get behind. And so in the exact same fashion as to what would happen if someone did this now, he goes to jail for doing something incredibly stupid but kind of relatable, and immediately becomes a celebrity. He gets a book deal, and he's writing his book titled King for a Night while he's in prison, serving like 2 of the 6 years that he was sentenced for. He develops this huge following and has these legions of fans, and he gets out of jail after serving some time and basically gets what he wants, and he becomes rich and famous and goes on tour to talk about his book, and that's just basically how the movie ends. And we don't ever learn what happens to Rita, Masha, Jerry, or anyone else really, besides Rupert. For one, because none of them mattered to Rupert. Like, as soon as he got what he wanted, I don't think it's a stretch to say that he was perfectly fine just kind of ditching everyone else in his life. And there's another question here as to whether or not the ending was real or if it was in Rupert's head. And I don't really like to analyze film in this really literal kind of way, but I think it's appropriate here because there are several scenes throughout the film where Rupert is fantasizing either about Rita or his life as a comedian, and these are obviously not real, right? Like the one where Jerry is asking him to take over the show, and he's like, I don't know, Jerry, I'm a little busy. Like, that one's not real. Or the really crazy one where he's on the Late Show and Jerry surprises him by bringing out Rita and having his high school gym teacher marry them on the show. And his gym teacher actually also apologizes for how he treated Rupert in high school and apologizes on behalf of the entire world for not believing in him all along. Like, that one obviously didn't happen. But some of them are a little more subtle, and I think there are some scenes left open for interpretation. For example, throughout the film, Rupert practices his stand-up. He practices pitching his stand-up and his interview skills in the basement at his mom's house. And we hear his mom yelling at him from upstairs to keep it down, and he gets embarrassed and yells back at her. But in the monologue at the end of the movie, he actually says that his mom died 9 years ago. Now, one interpretation of this is that he lied and his mom isn't actually dead, which is something he would do. But another interpretation is that Rupert is having these schizophrenic conversations with his dead mother, and that's honestly also something that he would do. And even the scene where he goes to Jerry's house with Rita, I believe that Rupert was there, but I kind of don't believe that Rita was there. For one, because there's just no way that Rupert was like, oh yeah, Jimmy Fallon invited me over to hang out with him this weekend, and she would just be like, oh cool, like I'll come to that. Especially after she didn't believe him when they were at dinner and he was saying that he's friends with all of these famous celebrities. But for two, like when they're at the house, neither Jerry nor his butler really interact with Rita. Like they like kind of do. Like when the butler is on the phone telling Jerry to come back home, he says there's a couple here. And then when Jerry gets back, he looks at Rita a couple times and then he kind of moves out of her way as she's walking somewhere, but he never talks to her and doesn't really acknowledge her that much. I mean, this may be kind of a stretch. I don't know. I guess you'd have to go back and just watch the scene to figure it out for yourself. But in either way, it doesn't matter, right? I don't think the point is to like figure out which of these scenes are real or which ones are in Rupert's head. I think the point is that because Rupert clearly can't distinguish like fantasy from reality, I think Marty is trying to express this, and the film is like reaching out and imbuing the audience with the same schizophrenia that Rupert has. And really the same schizophrenia that we all have in our relationships with celebrities like Kendrick and Drake, especially for my boy DJ Academics and other Drake dick writers. And relationships that are truly farcical in the sense that, for one, the celebrities don't know who you are, you'll never be one. But for two, because you don't really want to be one, like in The King of Comedy, there's a great scene of Jerry walking home from work, and he has all these fans who like wave at him and gas him up. He's just having a good time, like interacting with them. But literally the first person who asks him for something and he's like, sorry, I can't. She just immediately is like, you know, go fuck yourself, kill yourself. And he's just like, it's kind of down about it and then like sulks home. And then, you know, of course, he also has to deal with Rupert and Masha. And look at Robert De Niro's character in The Joker, which I think this is the first time I've mentioned that he played both Rupert Pupkin in this movie and Jerry Lewis's counterpart in The Joker, but he did. And yeah, he died in that movie. And I mean, look at the guy in real life who tried to kill Ronald Reagan because he saw a Taxi Driver and wanted to impress Jodie Foster, which I guess I can't really co-sign doing that, but, you know, maybe I wish that he just would have went ahead and killed Ronald Reagan. No, I'm just playing, of course. I don't actually wish that. And this reminds me that I wanted to cover Rupert's relationship with Rita in this movie and contrast it with Arthur Fleck's relationship and Travis Bickle's two relationships in Taxi Driver. And I'll say this one is interesting because, like in The Joker, the relationship is completely imaginary. And in Taxi Driver, he does like the classic misogynist dichotomy where every woman is either like an angel or a whore. And there is a discussion to be had as far as like how critical or sympathetic that movie is to that view. But that may have to be its own episode. But here anyway, Rita exists in real life, and her and Rupert do have some kind of relationship, but she's not like a real person, right? Like she is really more of a canvas for Rupert to project himself onto. So in that sense, their relationship is a little more in the background than the ones in Taxi Driver. And The King of Comedy, I also want to touch on, it's the least violent of these three movies. Whereas, like, Travis Bickle attempts to assassinate a presidential candidate, and Arthur Fleck kills a comedian and then starts, like, the Joker rebellion. There really wasn't much of a hint here that Rupert was ever going to hurt Jerry. Now, I don't think he would have stopped Masha from hurting him. You know, he kind of just left her there with him, and whatever happened. But I feel like his lack of, I guess, real violence is what makes his character, and by extension, the King of Comedy, I guess, the most relatable out of the three. Like, I certainly sympathize with Rupert Pupkin more than with these other two characters. And of these three movies, this is definitely the one I go back to whenever things get to the point where it's like all you can really do is laugh at them. And I would say ultimately this is probably my favorite of the three. But yeah, Taxi Driver, great movie. Very similar to The King of Comedy, also directed by Martin Scorsese. Joker, great movie. King of Comedy, great movie. You should really see all three. And since you're still listening, I guess I need to say once again that I'm very proud of you. You're still a good little listener. And you can find this podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and now SoundCloud. Also, if you're on Letterboxd, you can follow me at the account in the description. And I hope you stay safe, and see you next time.